You're listening to a CNA podcast.
There's an old saying, grandchildren are the crown of the aged. And in China, grandparents wear that crown with pride. But it can sometimes weigh heavily. For years, tens of millions of seniors have been moving to cities from rural areas to help care for their grandkids. But these urban settings can be unfamiliar places, and building a new community can be a challenge, particularly for elderly who don't use social media to connect with others their own age. My colleagues in CNA's Shanghai bureau recently caught on to an unexpected phenomenon. A popular home furnishing store serving as fertile ground for Chinese seniors seeking companionship and love as a way to beat the burdens of loneliness. Correspondent Tan Yuguan joins us now. Hi, Yuguan.
Hello.
When I read the brief on this report that you were working on, I have to say, a smile came to my face because it's such a quirky little story. Okay, so take me to an IKEA in Shanghai. What did you or your team see that made you think, okay, there's something going on here?
Well, as of many things these days, we first saw it on social media. So what happens is that, Shanghai is a very big place. It's a city of 25 million people. That's almost the population of Australia. All right. So it's actually pretty hard to stumble upon things physically. And of course, this particular gathering only happens on Tuesday in IKEA. So, why would we be in IKEA on a Tuesday, right? So essentially, we stumbled on it online. And what happened is that the source for the item actually came from my very capable assistant, Jackie, who is a Shanghai local. And she saw this article on her social media account. She's actually in charge of, combing through all the Chinese social media every morning. And happily, this was one of the stories that popped up. And given that I'm not that young myself, I'm no spring chicken. I'm here in Shanghai without my partner as well. So I kind of empathize to a certain degree the loneliness that some of these seniors might feel and how they might feel the need to, join social gatherings and stuff like that in order to feel less lonely and also more connected to society in general, right? Because for these seniors who are older, who lost their life partners, finding people who can connect with them can be quite a great solace. And in fact, the oldest among us, our cameraman, Emil, he was actually approached at least once by a senior in one of these gatherings at the park, right, to chat. Right? So you can see, actually we are not that far from the seniors that we featured actually in age.
I love that.
At least. Yeah.
Emil is such a friendly guy. I'm sure he indulged whoever started speaking to him.
He was very nice to them, yes.
There is a deeper phenomenon at play here. Namely, there's an increasing number of people who are living longer. They're living in urban areas compared to the rural parts of China, right?
That's right. China has undergone very rapid urbanization over the past few decades. It's a very deliberate move, right, on the central government's part to have this rapid urbanization. China is also growing at a very unprecedented rate, right? The United States says that China is expected to have over 500 million people, right, over the age of 60 by the year 2050, right? That exceeds the population of the United States, right? Imagine that. Right. And as for urbanization, from 1978 to about now, right, China's urbanization rate has risen from the original 16% of the population to about 66% of the population living in cities, big and small. As a result, China has tens of millions of so-called 老漂族 or elderly migrants who moved to the cities, right? And some didn't just move to the cities, they also moved from smaller cities to bigger cities, or maybe from city to city, right? It depends on where their children go to study or to build their careers, right? And therefore, when they're successful and they have children, they ask their parents to come and join them, which is a very Chinese thing, Asian thing to do, right? To have your parents live with you. So when these parents go to these cities or a different city to live with their children and help look after their grandchildren, which happens quite often too, because now, you have both parents working, right? The move can actually be quite detrimental to their health, right? I was talking to He Lingfeng, right? He's a professor at School of Psychology, Shanghai University of Sport. And this is what he says.
In urban China, nearly 85% of young parents rely on grandparents to help raise children. Grandparents often move to cities for this. While it benefits the younger generation, we found it has no benefits for the mental health of the elderly. At first it seems great, being surrounded by grandchildren, caring for them. But in reality, these seniors, after moving into the city, feel like guests, living in someone else's home, not the owner.
So, Teresa, aside from being just guests in their children's home, these grandparents, if they lost their life partners, right, they are the only senior at home, right? As such, they don't have a peer to talk to. And, everyone has their frustrations, right? And for these seniors, they could include frustrations at home, right? Be it about their grandkids, their own children, or their children's spouses, right? Some of these things just need an outlet, it's not that serious. It just needs, someone to talk through it, right? After all, we are talking about people from two very generations when you're talking about these seniors and their children, right? Because you see, given that China has changed so tremendously over the past 5 decades or so, you're talking about people who possibly lived through the Cultural Revolution versus people, right, who lived through the boom years in the 1990s, right? So you had the seniors, right, who lived through such tremendous turmoil versus another generation who lived through, prosperity, right? And the new millennium, right? So we're talking about generations with vastly different outlooks.
But this story is so relatable because we all have a desire for love and companionship regardless of age. That need never leaves us. And I personally know a lot of people who have used apps, to meet not just life partners, but new friends as well. Apps, though, Yu Guan, they're not always accessible for these seniors.
That's right. Apps could be a bit of a challenge. I mean, online payments, or rather digital payments, is very much a necessity here. So I have seen seniors using apps to pay for their purchases and stuff like that. These are life necessities, right? But I think to then, ask them to go one more step further to use social apps or dating apps, that's a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah.
It's culturally for them. So for them to go onto a dating app, that's like a totally, different world that they have never really experienced. At least in a physical, dating gathering ground, that's something that they can still accept. They have hard time finding companions, people to talk to, right? So some of them who can get over that barrier, right, of dating at such an old age, is a cultural barrier, right? Well, I guess in a way, the loneliness kind of drives them, right? They flock to these gathering points like IKEA, and also in my story, I talked about People's Park. And Dr. He Lingfeng, who I spoke to, right, he's professor of School of Psychology at the Shanghai University of Sport. And he says that, it's really this lack of public platform that is really quite a problem for these seniors. Here's what he has to say.
A major challenge for rural people moving into cities is the lack of public platforms and spaces. Unlike young people, seniors don't have many options for online socializing, right? Without social venues, they often feel constricted at home, unable to express their feelings or conflicts, whether with daughters-in-law or sons-in-law, about lifestyle or values.
As you say, besides IKEA, parks, they're a popular place for seniors to get together. Can you set the scene for us? How many elderly are we talking about? What are they doing there exactly?
So the gathering at IKEA is actually quite huge. I think we are talking about ballpark. I'm really bad at counting like that, but ballpark, we're talking about 80 people at least, right? Maybe even into the hundreds, right? But at the park, we're talking about 50 to 60 people, right? Now, so what happens at these occasions, as with many social events, these are, there will be cliques, right? There will also be lone rangers who are trying to befriend people who are there, right? I mean, the key thing here is companionship and different types of companionship, right? It could be just short term, right? Maybe just a chit chat at the park, or it could be a companionship for life, right? So the objectives can be different for different people. We spoke to some of them at the park, right? And here's what they have to say.
People like us don't want to have kids anymore. We just want to find a companion. We're getting older, and being alone is very lonely.
My son doesn't really agree, but I have my own ideas. I'm getting old and I want to find a partner, someone to be by my side. If I catch a cold or can't cook, he can help. If I get sick, he will go with me to the hospital.
I keep smiling. I keep thinking to myself, this is such a cute story. But there is serious concern about what happens to people who are lonely. And scientific research, it has shown time and again that loneliness can have a real negative impact on longevity and well-being. So these seniors, Yuguan, they're actually doing something really healthy for themselves and I'd say for broader society as well.
That's right. Yeah. Because, after all, these seniors, a lot of them are not just idling at home, Some of them do have duties at home taking care of their grandchildren, right? So while they don't have their partners to take care of anymore, they do have other duties. And you can imagine if the grandparent herself is unhappy, right? I don't think she'll be much of a good caretaker for the grandchildren, right? Mm-hmm. Right. And in fact, loneliness is quite an issue among older people, right? Not just in China, although China has its own unique circumstances, like we mentioned earlier, with the Lao Piao Zhu, the people who moved to the cities, right? Who moved away from their friends in the rural areas, or moved away from their friends in their own cities. The World Health Organization, right, actually did a survey of a handful of countries, right? And it found that up to 1 in 3 older people, right, are lonely, which is why experts hope that, countries could find avenues for these seniors, right, to find companionship. And in fact, the expert I spoke to, the psychologist, He Lingfeng, right, whom you heard from earlier, he was just telling me that he's actually rather adamant, right, or hopeful that places like IKEA, right, even though it's not their function to be gathering places for seniors, would allow these gatherings to continue, right, because they play such a big role for the seniors.
So where do you see the search for love and, in turn, longevity going in China? I'm wondering in particular what the government's plans are. I mean, I imagine having a large, lonely, elderly population would be a national concern because it all ties into healthcare, elder care infrastructure, demand. What does the government have to say on this issue?
As far as I know, right, this is not the top priority for the Chinese government, or at least for the central government. The central government does have their hands quite full, right? Especially these days, right? With the liberation tariffs and what have you. They have expressed concerns about seniors who are actually single and alone, right? But they are more into providing them some financial support, some physical support, right? As far as we have seen, right, we have not seen anything about emotional support. And honestly, personally, I also think that it's not really something that the government, be it the central government or the city government, is best placed to do so. Maybe the city government can provide some incentives, for psychological help and counseling and stuff like that. But still, I feel this is something that is more suited for NGOs, right? Or other types of community organizations. If you go to the parks, you will notice, right, in the evenings or in the mornings, there will be gatherings of seniors, right, dancing. So this is something quite particular with China, right? You see this in almost every Chinese cities and town. In some parks, there'll be this gathering and then they'll play music and someone will be leading and then the group of seniors will be just dancing along.
So lovely.
It's quite lovely to see as it is, right? And which is why I say perhaps it's the community where such initiatives are best placed, right? And in a way, you could say people in China, they're quite resourceful about fulfilling their needs, right? Be it physical needs or, in this case, psychological needs, right? And what they really need is a space to do so. So organizations like IKEA or even the park authorities, right, So long they don't do anything, right, to upset the groups that already been formed, it'll be great, right? In fact, the IKEA that we spoke about, that has this gathering, has recently undergone renovations, right, and reopened last week. As far as we know, that bistro is still there. Unfortunately, we've not been able to go down and take a look how the Tuesday gatherings have evolved after these renovations. But I'm really, really hopeful that the seniors still have a place together.
Well, this was a very fun story to talk about, Yu Guan. Thank you very much for sharing this with us.
Thanks for having me.
And remember, you can head to YouTube and CNA.Asia to watch Yu Guan's report on seniors looking for twilight love. There are also TV episodes of CNA Correspondent every Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. I'm Teresa Tang. Thanks for joining me this week. The team behind this episode is Saya Win, Clara Ong, Tiffany Ang, Junaini Johari, and Craig Dale. Bye for now.